Hello. Please have a seat. Get comfortable. I'm so glad you could come in today. Well, my name is Jessica, and I'm going to be your therapist today. I know you've come in for some anxiety and stress reduction counseling. So, I just want to start off by letting you know that anything you say in here is confidential, unless you threaten to hurt yourself or another person, or unless you tell me about a child or an elder who's being injured. Those I do need to report, okay? Well, I have most of your basic information from our receptionist, so I would really like to start off with just asking you what brings you in today. Okay. So you have some general anxiety. Would you say, how often would you say you have anxiety throughout the day? Okay, that's an awful lot. I could see where that is affecting your life. Now, when you do have anxiety, is it just a little niggling nervousness, or are you having stomach cramps, or is it bringing you to tears, sort of on a level of 1 to 10, 1 being just very slightly anxious, 2, 10 being kind of curled up in bed, unable to move, anxious? What would you say you are? Okay. Alright, well that gives me a pretty good baseline. I hope you don't mind. I do have a cough drop in my mouth. I have a little bit of an upper respiratory infection, so I am on antibiotics. And I know I'm not contagious, or else I wouldn't have you in my office. But I do have a little bit of a sore throat and a cough. So if it's okay, I may have some tea periodically, and I do have a cough drop. Would you like any tea? Okay. So the next thing I would like to do is just ask you a few questions about your mood currently. Okay? So I'm going to have you rate this as 0, not at all, 1, somewhat, 2, moderately, 3, a lot, or 4, extremely. Okay? So how would you rate how depressed you feel right now? Do you feel sad or down in the dumps? Okay, remember, 1 would be somewhat, 4 would be extremely. Okay. Do you feel discouraged or hopeless? Okay. Low self-esteem. 0, not at all. 1, somewhat. 4, extremely. Okay. Worthless or inadequate. Okay. Loss of pleasure or satisfaction in life. Okay. That just gives me a basic range about your depression levels. So now I want to ask you a little bit about your anxiety. How anxious do you feel right now? That's okay. I know your first therapy session can be a little anxiety provoking. It's alright. How frightened are you? Okay. How much are you worrying about things? Alright. How much would you say you're tense or on edge? Okay. How nervous are you? Okay. And one thing that we don't often think about having to do with anxiety is anger. And they are often very connected. So, With 0 being not at all, 4 being extremely. How frustrated are you? Okay, annoyed, resentful, angry, okay, irritated. Okay. That's really helpful for me. It just gives me an idea of what we're working with. People with anxiety issues tend to have different levels of depression, anxiety, and anger. And so, going into this knowing what your levels are, it will help me figure out what technique we should use, or multiple techniques we should use in dealing with your anxiety. Okay, I just want to thank you for being so honest with me. I know that it's often difficult to open up to a therapist the first time you meet them. And it's fine if in future sessions you talk about things that you haven't brought up at this point. I never get offended if you're holding things back in the beginning. I understand. You don't know me yet, and you don't trust me yet. But hopefully we can build that relationship over time. Okay? Alright, do you just want to talk to me a little bit about a specific situation that you've recently had where you felt anxiety? Alright? Okay, tell me a little bit more about that. Okay, was there a certain person involved? Alright, exactly when was this? Okay. What was going on when you felt this way? Alright. What time of day was it? Let's really flesh out the situation. Where exactly were you? Alright. What time of day was it? Were you feeling hungry? Do you remember? Were you feeling tired? Okay. Had you gotten enough sleep the night before? Alright. These may all seem unrelated, but they all affect our ability to handle stressful situations. Okay. So tell me a little bit more about exactly what was going on. Alright, and how exactly were you feeling? When you say anxiety, where do you feel your anxiety? Many of us feel it in a specific part of our body. I know for me, I tend to feel it in my stomach. I'll get butterflies in my stomach if I'm anxious. Some people will pull their shoulders up to their ears. They'll feel it in their shoulders and their back. Okay. It's really important to start paying attention to those sort of things for 2 reasons. First of all, you can start to notice when you are starting to feel anxious before it gets too overblown and you get too upset. If you notice your shoulders are raising, or you notice your stomach starting to feel upset, you can pay attention to that and hopefully try to do some of the techniques to calm yourself down. Also, sometimes there are other things that are causing the physical aspects of stress, and we associate them with the mental aspects of stress. So, I know for myself, sometimes when I am having stomach problems, when I am just feeling irritated in my stomach, or I've eaten something that's not sitting well with me, I tend to run through my brain more things that make me anxious, because I associate stomach problems with anxiety. So my brain almost starts to search for things that I could be anxious about. So do start paying attention to the physical aspects as well. So again, you can, eat some yogurt or take some acidophilus if your stomach is bothering you. They have recently done studies with probiotics showing that probiotics can often affect anxiety and depression as much as antidepressants. Again, it just shows how physically connected we are to our anxiety. Or if you notice your back is starting to get tense, you could do some stretching to help your shoulders loosen up. It is very hard to stay anxious mentally when our body is relaxed, and vice versa. It's very hard to have an anxious body when our mind is nice and relaxed. So we have to pay attention to both. Correct? Okay. Now I just want you to start thinking about if you're really ready to start working on your anxiety. It may seem a simple question. Of course, we don't want to feel anxious, but in actuality, there's often something that's tying us to our anxiety. For many years, and even sometimes currently, I tend to associate anxiety with taking things seriously and with working hard. So I feel like when I have a problem in my relationships, in my life, or in my work, if I'm not feeling anxious about it, it means I'm not taking it seriously and I'm not working hard on it. So, for that reason, I have often held on tightly to my own anxiety. So I really want you to think about, are you ready to let go of this anxiety? And what would it mean to you to let go of that anxiety? What would it change in your life? It would often change things very much for the better, but sometimes there's part of our brain that feels like losing the anxiety would change things for the worse. So do think about those things so that we can really get to the core of what this anxiety is. Okay? What would it be worth to you to solve this problem? How hard would you be willing to work? Think of how many years you've been developing this anxiety issue. So it's not going to go away overnight. In many ways, anxiety becomes a habit for us, and it takes quite a long time to break a habit. Think about smoking or other addictions. Many people do put down a cigarette and never touch one again, but that doesn't mean they don't think about it. Doesn't mean they aren't tempted to have one. It is the very rare person who has an addiction of some sort that can walk away from it and never think about it again. I think there's probably no one who can never think about it again, but there are people who handle it better. But for most of your life, you've been developing the thought patterns that go along with this anxiety and stress. So to undo those thought patterns is going to take some time, and it's going to take some hard work. So you need to make sure that you feel it's going to be worth it in the end. Because if you don't, you're going to give up, you're going to feel discouraged, and you're going to sometimes make yourself feel worse. Now, having said that, I worked in addictions for many years, and in some ways, this is similar in that it is very likely you will have relapses. So as much as we can try to train our brains to think differently, our brains will fall back into those habits sometimes, and you need to be very careful not to beat yourself up. It's one of the reasons why we 50% of the day. It's very hard to gauge that if you're not keeping track of it on a regular basis. And so often we can look at our day and say, I'm still anxious. This isn't working. It doesn't mean it's not working. It just means it's a slow process. 50% of the day means you've gotten back 10% of your day that you can enjoy anxiety free. So don't expect that it will be totally gone. It may never be totally gone. Most of us, there's no way we never feel stress. We just learn how to cope with it better, and we learn to not let it rule our lives. Okay? So, I want you to think about this stressful situation we discussed. What was it that you were telling yourself during this stressful situation? What were you thinking about yourself? We're often giving ourselves certain messages when we're feeling anxiety. Do you know what that was? Okay. What were you thinking about the other people involved in this situation? Alright. And now I want you to think about what you were thinking about the situation in general. Okay. One of the things that often helps with anxiety is to almost look at the situation like a third person. You are able to describe the situation much more impartially when you're not getting tied up in your own emotions. So can you explain the situation for me if you were watching it in a movie? Okay. So does doing that help you a little bit realize how many emotions and presumptions about what other people are thinking is playing into your thought process? Okay. Are those thoughts you're feeling about yourself, that you're thinking to yourself, are those necessarily true? I know they can feel true in the moment. I want you to seriously think about that. Another activity that I often have people do is to take a piece of notebook paper and fold it in half. And on one side, I want you to write down the next anxious situation that you have. Write down what happened, what you're thinking about it, what you feel about it. And then I want you to read through what you wrote, and on the other side, write down what you would say to a friend who told you the same situation. We are often very tough on ourselves, and we would never be that tough on other people. We expect perfection from us, but not from others. And we wouldn't treat our friends the way we beat ourselves up. So I'd like to give you that as homework for this week. And now I'd just like to end our session with a little guided meditation. Okay? And we'll probably stay pretty quiet afterwards so that you can take that feeling of relaxation and bring it with you to the rest of the day. So I just want to thank you for coming in. I'm really looking forward to working with you. I have lots of techniques that we can work on to see what works best for you. So if this homework I gave you this week doesn't doesn't work, don't get discouraged. It's one of 50 techniques I have right in front of me, and there are many more as well. So I just want you to know we're going to keep working at this together until we find something that is going to make you feel better. But it's going to be baby steps, one step at a time. Okay? Alright, I really enjoyed meeting you today, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Alright, take care. Hi. Come on in. No, it's so good to see you again. I've been looking forward to our session this week. Go on, make yourself comfortable. Pick whichever chair you want or the couch, whatever's comfortable for you. Can I get you some water or tea? I have some tea as well, if that's okay. I'll probably sip tea while we talk. Are you warm enough? Okay, there's a blanket if you'd like it. Honestly, this is a time to really get comfortable. If you feel like you need to hug a pillow, or if you need to wrap yourself up in a blanket, that's fine. Whatever you need to do. Okay? Well, I wanted to talk about a few new techniques this week, but first, how are things going? How's the past week been? Good? Have you used some of the techniques that we talked about last week? You're trying not to be quite so hard on yourself? I know, we all do it, and it's just practice, trying to break ourselves of that habit. And it's hard. It's not going to be easy. This is a habit you've had for a long time, so it's not going to go away in a day, in a week. So definitely don't beat yourself up if you can't do it all the time. But you will notice over time that it gets better and better. Just keep at it. And at some point, you'll look back and you'll realize that you haven't had a negative thought in a week, or you haven't had really debilitating anxious feelings for a month, and you'll wonder when that started to happen. So just keep doing what you're doing. Great. Anything else new going on this week? Okay. So you've had a little bit of anxiety at work. I know what that's like. Well, that actually leads well into what I wanted to talk about this week. So I know we've identified some of the thoughts that you have that seem to cause your anxiety, and one of them is perfectionism. So we're going to talk about a couple of those thoughts and some of the things that you can do to try and fight those thoughts and change your way of thinking. So first I'm going to talk about just a few common incorrect beliefs that we have about perfectionism. Pretty much that's the way you described it, is you tend to be a perfectionist. And I understand that very well. So some of the beliefs are that you can never fail or make a mistake. You have to be perfect all the time. Do you sometimes have thoughts like that? Sometimes it's hard to admit that you have them, because when faced with the reality of the wording of them, sometimes you can easily say, well, of course I can't be perfect, but it doesn't mean that somewhere in your heart and your brain you don't really feel like you need to be perfect. I know for me, I often feel like a lot of my self-worth comes from being perfect, from doing
things the right way all the time and the most just way all the time, and making sure everything is fair. And it's a constant struggle to remember that life isn't fair and that there isn't always a very clear right way or wrong way of doing things. And what I may think is right may not be the only way to do something. And I need to make sure not to be judgmental of other people and not to be judgmental of myself as well, that I'm allowed to make mistakes. We all are. And another thing that people often think is that others won't love them or accept them if they are flawed and a vulnerable human being. So I think a lot of times, whether we admit it or not, our perfectionism is seeking the approval of others. And I noticed that with myself as well, that a lot of times one of the reasons I need to be perfect at work is I want the approval of my boss. And I've recently learned that my boss is not very good at giving approval. My boss is very good at expressing disapproval when he's unhappy with something, but the absence of words from him generally means he is happy, which is a bit frustrating when you would like acknowledgement for your work. But it's also taught me that I need to find my self-worth from myself and not from someone else giving me approval. And it's actually been a really powerful experience for me to not get that positive approval from something that I do much of the day. There's also something called achievement addiction. So it's really believing that your worth as a human being depends on your achievements, intelligence, talent, status, income, or looks. So again, it's this belief that you are not worthwhile as a human unless you are the best at certain things, or perfect, or however it manifests in your head. Do any of those beliefs ring true? Most of us don't think them all the time, or we may not be entirely conscious that those are the thoughts behind our actions, but they often come to play at certain points in our life. And I know we've talked a little bit about your own perfectionism, and I think some incarnation of each of those probably plays out in your head. So today we're going to talk about 4 techniques for dealing with these thoughts. They're called the truth-based techniques. So again, a lot of times we believe that these thoughts we have are true without ever fully examining them. And so one of the ways to combat these thoughts is to ask yourself, what are the facts and what do they show? So for instance, if you believe that you always have to be perfect, what are the facts? Are you always perfect? Are the people you admire always perfect? Does that ring true, that humans can be perfect all the time? And the next technique that you can use is almost looking at your thoughts as a science experiment. So you really want to learn to define what the thought is. So if it is something like, for me, where my self-worth is based on being perfect at things, which again is not a thought I have all the time anymore, but it's one that I at least have had in the past. Um, you want to look at that like a hypothesis for a science experiment. So this is the theory that you're going into to test. So take that sentence or thought and think, how can I test this to find out if it's really true? So what can I do to prove that my self-worth is dependent on me being perfect all the time? So there are several ways to negate that. First of all, I'm not perfect all the time. And when faced with harsh wording like that, I don't truly believe that I am worthless when I make mistakes. And if it's hard to see yourself in that role, then think about other people as well with that sentence. So, are other people who make mistakes worthless? And of course, I don't believe that. I think, first of all, making mistakes is inevitable. We're human. If we were born knowing everything and knowing exactly what to do, it would be a very boring world. If I always made the same decisions now as I would make 20 years from now, that would be a very boring world. And the older I get, the more I see that there is no perfect. There is no right way to do things. There are better ways to do things. There are ways to do things that cause more problems. But there's not always one clear-cut path, which is the only path to follow. So, a good example is to, if you think your panic attacks are going to drive you crazy, sometimes it helps to just act ridiculous and take it to the extreme. So throw yourself down on the floor, scream and cry and flail your arms and try to drive yourself crazy. And sometimes that ridiculous act helps to shed a little bit of light on how extreme some of our negative thoughts can be and how ridiculous they are in their own light. Obviously, none of us can be perfect. I mean, I think we all, faced with that reality, understand that as humans, we cannot be perfect. So it's reminding ourselves of that. So the next technique is, again, a kind of scientific technique, but to see what other people think about your negative belief. So ask some friends and get their feedback. So when we're talking about perfection, I think a great place to look is Facebook. Read through some other people's walls. Are they perfect? People will often reveal quite a lot on social media, and you can see that you're not the only one struggling with these negative thoughts. There are a lot of people out there struggling with negative thoughts, and often they will write them on their walls throughout the day. And that doesn't mean you don't respect them, and it doesn't mean that they aren't important people. And it, in many ways, makes them seem more human. Those of us who try to come across as perfect do often seem less human because obviously we're not perfect. And acknowledging that we're not often always perfect is an important part of being human. Talk to your friends, talk to your family. Sit down your partner or your mother or somebody you trust and you really feel comfortable with and say, I'm going to do this ridiculous activity and just go with me. I want to ask you what you think about being perfect, or do you think I'm perfect, or do you think you're perfect? And when I make mistakes, do you love me less? Do you respect me less? Those kind of things. And ask, and again, you can tell them it's, it's ridiculous, but it's just a practice that your therapist has asked you to do. So the final technique that I want to talk about is thinking, not just blaming yourself for your thoughts. And again, I'm not saying that you're doing this task to try and blame others either, but to look at the components in your past life, people, places, things, whatever has occurred in your life that may have caused this problem. It's not all in your brain. There are probably things that happened when you were younger that made you want to be a perfectionist. There was some interplay between the praise I got when I did well at things and how that made me feel. That made me want to seek that out all the time. So does going through these techniques seem to help at all? I think it's often useful to feel like you have something to grasp onto, that there are things you can do to make you feel a bit more in control of your thoughts and your behaviors and your anxiety. So that's why I want to go through these techniques with you. And I hope that they're helpful. I hope that they allow you to look at your anxiety in a new light and maybe re-examine some of the negative thoughts that seem so big and powerful in our brains, and when we really bring them to the light, often seem ridiculous and easy to refute. But again, one of the things that we do is we try to avoid pain. And if we think that these thoughts are going to, that not following these thoughts are going to cause us pain. So if I decide I'm going to do things wrong all day, do the opposite of what I think I should do, I'm afraid that will cause me a lot of anxiety and pain, and it will be very uncomfortable for me. And sometimes learning to embrace the pain, not our fears of what will happen, not our fears of what has happened, but actually our fear of the feeling of pain. So for me, the feeling of pain, of mental pain, is my stomach sinking. And almost embracing that pain. And really, when I start to feel nervous about pain, looking at that feeling of pain and just embracing it, and accepting that pain makes me stronger and it helps me to move on. And if I avoid things in my life because of pain, because of this fear of anxiety or this fear of this sinking stomach feeling, that I will regret it and I will stagnate, because I will stay only in my comfort zone and I won't learn anything else. So each time I start to worry about something that may cause me anxiety, I try to picture that pain, and again, for me, it's my stomach sinking, and feel it and just embrace it and just accept that there's going to be some of that feeling in my life. And in many ways, it's not a negative feeling. It means I'm moving through something difficult and I'm growing in that area. And if, again, you always stick with things that you're comfortable with, you won't ever grow. So let's take a deep breath and move on from all this thought of anxiety. And we'll end with a guided meditation in a few moments. But I wanted to let you know how happy I am to see you today, and that I'm glad things are getting better, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Okay.
Hello. Come on in. It's so good to see you. Have a seat. Get comfortable. Can I get you some water or tea or anything? Oh, you're all set. I hope you don't mind. I'm going to have some tea while we talk. So, tell me about how things have been going. You feeling a little better? Good. So things are going well at work and school? Better. Good. What do you think has changed? Do you think it's a real change in your workload, or do you think it's a change in your attitude about your workload? Yeah, maybe a little of both. That's pretty common. Everything else is going well. How are things at home? Okay. All right. That's good. Well, and on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you say your anxiety levels have been on average this week? Good. Well, that's better. Definitely. On a scale of 1 to 10, how is your anxiety level today? Lower because you're coming in here. Well, that's good. That's good to hear, because sometimes, your therapy session can be anxiety provoking. So I'm glad to hear that it calms you down. That's great. Well, I had a couple more techniques that I wanted to talk to you about today. Have you been employing some of the other techniques that we talked about? Oh, good. So you've been writing what you would say to a friend? And do you keep a journal? Good. Journal writing is very good for releasing some of your thoughts. I know a lot of anxiety issues is often thought racing, is that we can't stop our brain from working. Does it cause you insomnia? Yeah, that's for a lot of people who have trouble falling asleep. It's because their thoughts are racing and they can't turn them off. And it's often a really good practice just to get up, write down your thoughts, or write down whatever you're obsessing over. I know I've had occasions where I would be talking through an anxiety-provoking phone call I needed to make, or a conversation I needed to have with my boss, or something like that, and I will run it over and over and over in my head. And sometimes I've found it really helpful just to get up, write it down, so I won't forget it. I won't forget what I wanted to say, although often reading it the next morning, it's not really what I want to say anymore, but just getting it off my chest. And then what I'll sometimes do at that point is meditate for a few minutes, 10 minutes or so, and then try to go back to sleep, and that often works for me. How often do you have insomnia? Okay, so it's not a major problem, but it would be nice to get rid of that as well. Well, hopefully going through these techniques
on a regular basis, keeping the ones that seem to work for you. You'll be able to use them when you have insomnia as well. I think one of the things that we tend to do is lay in bed and keep doing whatever we are doing that is giving us insomnia. So it's usually thinking, and usually the best thing to do is to actually get up. Get up and read a boring book, do something to take your mind off of things. I will often listen to MP3s of relaxing audio. I know a lot of people who listen to books on tape to help them fall asleep. Yeah, what I try to do is rather than watch videos on YouTube, I will listen to them or have an MP3 of some of the audio, because the light from the screen sometimes can actually keep you awake. So if you're actually looking at the screen, so if you are going to use a video, it's usually helpful if the screen is not facing towards you, if you close your eyes and you just listen. But that works for me. I do that a lot too. Yeah, and then again, writing down. Or sometimes I'll even record myself talking. I'm not a big fan of journaling. I believe it is tremendously helpful, and so I have tried many, many times to keep a journal. But I don't enjoy writing. I've never enjoyed writing. I have learned how to write correctly for school, but it's not something that makes me happy. So I have found that recording things is easier for me, and sometimes I will record with speech recognition, so that if I want a written copy of it later, I can go back and just correct any speech recognition errors, and then I have a written copy of what I recorded as well. Okay. Well, good. I'm glad we talked about that. We had never really discussed sleep issues in the past, so that's good. Are you ready to talk about a few more anxiety techniques? Okay. So the first couple of techniques we're going to talk about are logic-based techniques. So the first is the Socratic method. I don't know if you have studied Socrates much or read much Socrates, but it's about questioning. So what you want to do is ask yourself questions that will lead to the inconsistencies in your negative thoughts. So, for example, what's one of your negative thoughts? That you're a failure. Tell me more about that. Feel like you fail at everything you do. Okay, so the example would be when you say, I'm a failure at everything I do you mean that you fail at some things some of the time, or at all things all of the time? You feel like you fail at all things all of the time. Well, and then you would want to look at that and realize that that's not possible. It isn't true of anyone. No one fails at everything. We couldn't function in life if we failed in everything. You obviously succeed in going to work. You succeed in feeding yourself. You succeed in keeping yourself in an apartment. You succeed in your relationship. So, looking at that and realizing that you make some mistakes some of the time, and that's true of all humans. Again, you can't hold yourself to non-human standards. We all make mistakes. We all make mistakes on a regular basis, and we're all embarrassed by them at certain points. Now, another thing we do when looking at our problems is we look at them as black and white. We are either always good or we're always bad. We fail at everything or we never fail at anything. And you want to make sure that you're being realistic when you're looking at whatever's causing you anxiety and evaluate them in shades of gray. We are never all one way or another way. If things don't work out as you hoped, you can think of the experience as a partial success or a learning opportunity. If you've made a bad decision, it's something that you can learn from. If you're unhappy in your job, you want to look at what you can learn from that situation and what you need to do to improve it. But rather than looking at things as this is bad, this is good, what's the good in the bad situation? Okay? And you want to pinpoint your specific errors. So what are the mistakes that were made? Instead of writing yourself off as a total failure. Like we talked about earlier, you can't fail at everything, or you wouldn't be here today. You would be stuck in your home, unable to go anywhere. There are lots of things that you do to function in this world, and you do them well. So you can't look at yourself as a failure in everything. Okay? Do those two techniques make sense? Do you think either would work for you? And again, sometimes you can pull in some of the other techniques. So what would you say to a friend? Because often you would ask these kind of questions to a friend if they're making unrealistic expectations about themselves. If that technique tends to work for you, then pull these in, looking at the shades of gray when you're talking to yourself as if you were a friend. All right? Now, some other important techniques are about semantics, but the way we talk to ourselves in our thoughts. All of our feelings they don't just occur from things that happen. Something happens, we have thoughts about it, which then causes our emotions about the situation. So, if we drop our ice cream on the floor, our thought could be, I'm so clumsy, I drop everything, I really wanted that ice cream, now I can't have it, and then we're miserable. Our thought could be, I'd actually already had enough, my waistline could afford not to have the rest of that ice cream anyway, I'm glad the decision was made for me, and then you move on and you're content. So really the same situation, the situation does not cause your emotions. Your thoughts about the situation cause the emotions. And many of us talk to ourselves in our thoughts in a very negative manner. We use words to talk to ourselves that we would never use to anyone else. So one of the things you want to do is make sure that the language you use with yourself is not as emotionally loaded. So instead of thinking, I shouldn't have made that mistake, you can tell yourself, it would be preferable if I hadn't made that mistake. It would have been good if I hadn't made that mistake. Hopefully next time I won't make that mistake, instead of this very black and white thinking, which we talked about earlier, of I shouldn't. And it's very should
or shouldn't is a very blaming word too. It doesn't give any leeway for mistakes. So when you hear yourself using this language of labeling yourself as I am always this way, so when you label yourself as inferior or a fool or a loser or something like that, think about what those labels mean. What's the definition of that term? And when you define the terms, there's really no such thing as a fool or a loser. Foolish behavior exists, and other behaviors that don't work in our benefit exist, but no one is all one way. Nobody fits into one label cleanly. But we like to label ourselves sometimes, and so don't let yourself get away with that. When your negative self-talk starts telling you you are all one way or all another way, then fight against it. Again, be that good friend to yourself to say, of course you're not a fool. You've done this and this and this and this, which proves you're not a fool. And you're not a loser. Again, here are all the things you've accomplished in your life. Clearly, you're not a loser. Again, it's this very black and white thinking. So when you find yourself labeling or the kind of terms that you're using, really think about it. Have that conversation with yourself. Don't let yourself use those thoughts that make you feel inferior, cause that anxiety, make you feel like you're always one certain way. We are very changeable beings. Remember that pretty much every 7 years, almost all of the cells in our body have regenerated. So there's very little of our body that is the same as 7 years ago. So obviously, we can't be the same our whole life. We are changeable beings. We like to see ourselves as this core unit that doesn't change. But, and our memory distorts things. I think if we were to talk to ourselves from 10 years ago, we would be very surprised as to how different we were than we see ourselves in our memory. So you are changing. You are not always going to be one way. Your mistakes are not always going to feel as big as they do right now. Everything is changing in life. Okay? The other semantic technique that we want to use is to be specific about your strengths and weaknesses. Again, instead of using judgments about what kind of person you are and whether that's good or bad, you want to think of yourself as having strengths and weaknesses. We all do. So clearly, because you make mistakes, it doesn't make you defective or worthless. You have some weaknesses that you can work on, but there are strengths that balance those out, and often our strengths are our weaknesses. So it's very hard to see them one way or the other. Using myself, for example, I am a very compassionate person. Of course, we would think of that as a strength, right? Compassion is a strength. It causes me great anxiety because I am constantly worrying about other people. I'm worrying about how other people feel. I'm worrying about how other people think about me. I'm worrying about all of these other things. Is this other person happy? Does this other person, I try to project onto other people how they will think and how they will feel. So although compassion is definitely my strength, and it's one of the reasons why I work in this field, it's also my weakness, because my strong sense of compassion for other people is what also causes me to have a lot of anxiety. Now, again, talking about that, I've overcome a lot of these things. I I use all the tools and techniques that I talk to you about. So I am not as anxious as I used to be, and I really, especially as I get older, do not worry about what other people think about me as much. And I've lost a lot of the egocentricity of when I was in my 20s. And we think of egocentricity as somebody who only thinks about themselves, but the problem is when you're egocentric, you think everyone else thinks like you do. So for me, if I see someone else in a situation that would cause me anxiety or make me upset, I assume they feel the same way. And I have slowly started to learn that that is not true. um, I heard a quote once, or someone told me that we are all stars in our own movie. So that person over there who I may think feels just like me, they're a star of their own movie. I am a bit player in their movie. And they may have thoughts and feelings that are very different from mine, and I can't predict what those are. The more I study of the brain, the more I realize that our brain chemistries are all so different that there's no way we can all react to the same situations in the same way. We don't have the same makeup in our brains. And I in some ways can't understand yours. I can try, and I can have you explain things to me so that I can try to understand how your brain works. But again, brains are very different. So it is important to keep that in mind, and so I worry less about what other people think of me because I've realized that I can't predict what other people are going to think of me. I may think I am being so wonderful to someone and I'm taking care of them, and they may think I'm a nag and I am, in their face all the time and I won't leave them alone. I can't predict that, and especially with little nuances in relationships. So I've slowly started to let that go. And when I need to know what somebody thinks, I ask them. And I try to get them to give me an honest answer. And I try not to predict anymore. So that was a little tangent about semantic techniques. So the techniques we really talked about today are the logic-based techniques. So making sure that you question yourself and you question your beliefs and you don't think in black and white, because life just doesn't work that way. There's no all good, there's no all bad in anybody at any time. Semantic techniques, so making sure that you don't let your self-talk be unrealistic and negative, and really change the words that you use in your thoughts, and making sure that you're specific with yourself about, if you are trying to label yourself as one way or another, think about the ways in which that's not the case. If you're trying to say you're always one way, think about your strengths in other ways, and realize that yes, you have weaknesses, but we all do. Okay? Well, good. I hope those are useful for you. I hope you can use them this week. All right. Well, I want to end with a little affirmation card. I bet you've picked one out when you first came in outside of the office. So I have that card, and I'm going to have you just close your eyes. Take a deep breath in and just listen to my voice. My life is a mirror. The people in my life are really mirrors of me. This affords me the opportunity to grow and change. My life is a mirror. The people in my life are really mirrors of me. This change. When you feel ready, you can open your eyes, and I look forward to seeing you next week.